Hey TYT, I'm Nomiki Konst, sitting here in front of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. We were here all day interviewing former congressmen, current congressmen and women. We have a live, I'm just going to give you a quick update so you know and you're ready. We're going to be going live with Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard at 3:15, around that time, at the Capitol to discuss the DNC. This interview was actually already planned before the news of Donna Brazile's article, the article that she had posted on Politico, which is an excerpt from her upcoming book that's coming out in a little over a week. So there's a lot to unpack here because this is big news. We will be talking about it with Representative Gabbard, who, if you recall, was a vice chair of the DNC and stepped down when she endorsed Bernie Sanders, partially due to a lot of the problems that the DNC had been facing. So just some background. Donna Brazile was the chairwoman, the interim chairwoman, and this was after Debbie Wasserman Schultz had stepped down at the convention. We all remember what happened around the convention. WikiLeaks was published. It was embarrassing. There's been a lot of back reporting since then in the book Shattered by Amy Parnas and Jonathan Allen. This is something that's been reported on extensively since it occurred, about whether or not they should have had her go up on stage. She should have even shown up. The way that they kind of worked around it was they gave the position to Donna Brazile, who's the interim chair. Now, WikiLeaks later exposed that Donna Brazile, who at the time was a vice chair of the DNC, so she still had a position at the DNC, an appointed position, not a paid position, she had shared information with the DNC about the DNC with CNN. So information from CNN, questions from CNN to DNC and Hillary for America staffers. Now, she obviously has gotten a lot of pushback from Donna Brazile, has gotten a lot of pushback from progressives. A lot of folks want to relitigate the primary fight. I want to take this a little bit deeper. I don't want this to be necessarily about Bernie and Hillary. I think we need to understand the dynamics of the Democratic Party. Now, for those of you who have followed me, I reported on the DNC chair's race extensively. Full disclosure, I am on the Unity Reform Commission. This is a commission that was set up at the convention, started this spring, and it is made up of 9 Hillary Clinton choices, 7 Bernie Sanders choices, and 3 choices by the chairman, Tom Perez. And there are 2 others that represent. There's the chairwoman, who is Jennifer O'Malley Dillon, and the vice chair, Larry Cohen, who represents the Bernie Sanders side. So I am not necessarily going to be discussing any of what's happening within the commission, although that is all public and we've reported on it. I'm going to talk about Donna Brazile's article, which is from her book, an excerpt from her book, which reflects a lot of the reforms that we're putting forward. And I've been very vocal about these things, and we reported on them during the DNC chair's race. Now, what Donna Brazile presented was that, number one, the Democratic National Committee has been in debt. It was in debt before Chairman Perez took position. It was in debt after the presidential campaign in which Hillary Clinton lost, and it was in debt before the presidential campaign even began. And what she described essentially was this joint fundraising committee. Now, the Joint Fundraising Committee is essentially where the DNC and Hillary for America had a committee and they worked together. So Hillary's side said that they were going to be giving money that they raised through the DNC to the state party leaders. Now, we all know, this has been reported on extensively, that did not happen. State parties did not receive that money, or it kind of went back up, meaning state parties were giving money to the DNC and then it was floating straight to the presidential campaign, but it was not going back down to the states. Now, the DNC was in serious debt before the presidential race, and I'll get to why that happened in a minute, but the excuse, I think, this is what I've come to understand, it seemed like it was a deal, that Hillary for America, as presidential campaigns do during these years, you know, the presidential campaigns come into the DNC, take over. Donna Brazile said the same thing. Al Gore didn't have a primary. That's what they did with Al Gore. In 1996, when President Clinton didn't have a primary, they took over the DNC. You know, it's in those primary years, like between Obama and Hillary Clinton, that's not exactly what happened. So it seems like it was a deal for the presidential race, which raises a lot of money, to basically make the Democratic National Committee solvent again, in that if this committee were set up as early as possible, then the money that Hillary Clinton would undoubtedly raise, which she was a very good fundraiser, we know, would somehow help the Democratic National Committee so that they would no longer be in debt and bring back the money. Now, my question is, and I've asked this over and over again, is why was the DNC in debt? Why was it so much in debt? And I think we have to be responsible here. Nobody likes to say these things out loud, but frankly, President Obama, and people say this internally all the time, President Obama was the de facto leader of the Democratic Party, put in OFA, which split funds up, essentially, and the money became a presidential reelection account and was not going to the states. We learned this during the DNC chairs race, that state parties, some of these leaders had a couple $1,000s on hand, that their executive directors were volunteers. They weren't even full-time or weren't being paid. That state parties didn't have the funds to go out there and recruit candidates and build up their parties so that they could win back those legislatures. So it's not just that the Democrats have lost 1,100 seats because of redistricting and because of Republicans and because of Fox News, but they lost 1,100 seats. I don't even think there's a debate over this anymore because state parties weren't funded and weren't investing. And so the Democratic Party was in debt. And a way to kind of maneuver around this was to work with Hillary Clinton early on. And this is where I'm asking you guys to think a little bit more critically. I don't think it excuses the fact that the DNC was set up structurally to support Hillary Clinton early on, and that it prevented a real primary from happening, and that obviously, you know, when Hillary's campaign essentially took over the DNC, then all the decision making was going to be made within the context of how do we support Hillary Clinton. And oh yeah, by the way, we're paying your bills, so you better be quiet and fall in line, because, you know, if we want to win, then we all have to be on the same team. And if you don't want to have a Democratic National Committee continuously in debt, then you better work with us. And then, of course, that set the landscape for the Joint Fundraising Committee operating a full year before the primary was even settled, and well before Hillary Clinton actually had gone on any debates with Bernie Sanders. So there is now complete evidence, there was actually, you know, over a year ago, evidence that this fund was set up well before Hillary had even announced. She announced in June of 2015. It was set up in January, and, you know, we could go into the details of why that happened. Now this just flames the, you know, it's just throwing oil, gasoline into the flame that already exists of progressives being frustrated. Just when they think there's going to be a little bit more progress or things start to die down, something like this happens where they realize the DNC was in collusion with Hillary Clinton early on. Now, normally I'd say, okay, let's move beyond this. Let's think forward. But I do think it's important that we understand where this money went. What I'm going to tell you right now has not been reported on. And so I want to say this very clear, and I want you to realize that this is from my reporting capacity as a human being, as someone who understands the Democrats. This stuff is all public information, and it is a legalized form of, I would say this aspect right here is a legalized form of corruption. One of the things that we've been pushing extensively, and, you know, the chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party, Ray Buckley, brought it up when he was running for DNC chair race, was that they wanted to see the budget. The budget had not been put before the executive committee, meaning the budget was signed off on by the chair and nobody knew where the money was going. And nobody knew which contracts were being allocated and, you know, where, or there was no audit. There was no understanding of where the Democrats blew $1 billion during the presidential race. I mean, there were some very poor decisions made. And there were a lot of consultants involved in it. And I think that's just the general assumption, is that maybe this consultant class does not necessarily want the budget to be transparent or put before the executive committee, because suddenly, you know, that's where the road's going to stop. It's not just that they may not receive the money anymore, but they may be held accountable for mismanaging several campaigns, you know, over 1,100 campaigns, more or less. I wouldn't say all of these consultants were involved in them, but at least the presidential race. So I did some research back in February, and I reverse engineered where the spending was going. And there were 4 firms, vendors is what folks call them, there were 4 vendors that received the majority of the money, almost $1 billion. And, you know, some of that stuff goes to overhead, and some of it is, if you're a media firm, you're only getting a percentage of that money. But one in particular stood out to me. And it first stood out to me because I was very familiar with this vendor, and because they just kind of work with everybody. And that is the lawyer for the DNC. The law firm for the DNC is a firm called Perkins Coie. You may recognize that name because last week, Mark Elias, one of the lawyers from Perkins Coie, was brought up in another situation involving the DNC. Now, I saw how much money was flowing into this firm, and granted, you know, they had claimed that there was a firewall, meaning it wasn't that Perkins Coie was representing all these Democratic candidates. They represent the DNC, they represent the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, the DSCC, they represent the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. They also represented HFA, Hillary for America. They also represented the Victory Fund, the Joint Fundraising Committee. They also represented the Hillary Super PAC and Priorities. And they also represent Correct the Record. And they have represented Media Matters. This one firm has represented all of those entities, not to mention hundreds of candidates over the past, you know, probably more at this point, decades. They have a monopoly on Democratic politics. Now, what I am concerned about is not just that there's this conflict of interest, it's that, you know, they claim that there was a firewall, but what is one partner handle the DSCC and one partner handles the DCCC? Okay, that's fine. But when one partner handles the DNC and the other partner handles Hillary for America, you think that they're not having conversations with each other? You think that they don't have to report to each other what's happening? It's an absurd claim, and they're not the only compliance firm in America, and they're definitely not the only ones that can handle these types of presidential races. So the concern is over Perkins Coie. They received hundreds of millions of dollars from all, probably more, from all these different committees. And I will be publishing the most accurate number later today, so you're aware. And that firm, we now know that the Joint Fundraising Committee was set up way before Bernie was in the race and there was a primary. So if this firm was representing the DNC and the Joint Fundraising Committee and Hillary for America, but not representing Bernie Sanders, that's a problem. That's not just a presidential primary problem, that is an institutional problem. Also, if this firm is receiving so much money, perhaps it's within their interest to protect the fact that this DNC budget is not released. I mean, it is easy to figure out where a lot of this money was spent through FEC filings, but it's not about retroactively figuring out where it was spent, although that's very important. It's about why these decisions were not made before an executive committee at the DNC. Why was there no oversight? Why was there no accountability? If you're using a bad vendor, for instance, a vendor that might send out an email saying, "We're dying, save us. Oh my God, things are falling apart. The Earth's, you know, melting down." You know, everybody complains about these emails. Everybody complains about these emails. Well, shouldn't the executive committee say, well, where are the metrics here? How many people are opening up these emails? How much money is being raised off of them? Is that low or is that high? Is this message reflective of the party? Given the state of affairs in the Democratic Party, perhaps we should reassess all of these major vendors. But all of that stuff has been dealt with at the top. And at this state, when the Democrats are not trusted, when the Democrats are associated with the elites, when they have lost over 1,100 seats, when state party chairs are freaking out because they have no funds, when you have former President Obama going out there and starting another organization with Eric Holder focused on redistricting, when that was the duty of the DLCC, the Legislative Committee, but it wasn't being funded under Obama, you know, it's like divide and conquer. Are they trying to kill the Democratic Party? And what purpose is what I keep hearing over and over is, what is the purpose of the DNC? Why is there this territory fight over the DNC? In the end, why are people trying to save it and why are some people trying to kill it? What is the case for the Democratic Party, the DNC? Now, I would argue it's presidential primaries, it's ballot access, it's the ability to fund state parties so that they can recruit candidates and leaders. Now, President Obama can go out there and do that on his own in his own privatized committee, but that, they're not going to be able to report the same way on donors the same way that the DNC would, and they are not held to the same standards as a public party that an organization like OFA would, or a private entity would. So I believe that the party is reflective of its members. And so if you have membership that's voting or on executive committees or on the rules committee or being appointed by Chairman Perez, and those members are consultants and lobbyists, it is within their interest to keep that budget closed, meaning let's just perpetuate the failures of the DNC without having any accountability. So what I believe that, former Chairwoman Brazile, who's now on the Rules Committee, what she's bringing up in this piece is actually incredibly important, and it took a lot of courage, and she identified President Obama and she identified the Clinton campaign as being very responsible for this process. Now, that does not, I don't think that's a cop-out. I think, she may have her own intentions as to why she's putting this information forward now, but I'm grateful that she's doing it. That is not an easy thing to come out with and say. And she has a book coming out, and I'm sure there's other fascinating tidbits of information in that book. But my last question would be, why didn't you bring these things up before the DNC chair's race? Why did you wait to bring this up right before the book came out? There might be real answers, by the way. But I think that we would have saved a lot of stress had many people known before the chair's race, including DNC state party chairs who were voting in that race. I think many would have been interested in knowing this information well before the race, especially since Chairwoman Brazile knew about it. So I'm going to leave it at that. It's a very wonky conversation, but really in the end, it's, where did the Democrats blow $1 billion? Why did they blow $1 billion? And why don't they want to audit and figure out where that money went? Money is very, very important in politics. And, you always want to follow the money, and you always want to follow the intentions of those who are trying to protect the interests of those not interested in looking at the budget. So if anybody ever says, I don't want to reform the party, or get out of the party, or caucuses are racist, or any of these things, I believe that these are all distractions from the real issue, which is where did the money go? There's no defense. There's no real defense as to why the Democratic Party does not have oversight and accountability. If a corporation can do it, then the Democratic Party, also a corporation, should do it. They're losing members, and the only way to save yourself as a party and to win in 2018 and beyond is to have a solid base of accountability. The DSCC and the DCCC and Senator Schumer and the redistricting campaign and Nancy Pelosi will not solve this problem. This is an institutional problem, and it is actually something that is easily solved. And I give kudos to Donna Brazile for actually bringing this out in the public, because thus far it's really come from some people who've been punished, including myself, publicly for talking about the budget. And that would be Jim Zogby, who did not learn about this joint fundraising committee, even though he's on the executive committee. He did not learn about it until he read about it in the press. Ray Buckley, who openly discussed this and was kicked off the executive committee and then brought back on through election and resolution. There are a lot of people who want reform in this party, and I think the majority of the voting members actually want reform. The question is not if it happens, it's when and how easy it's going to happen. People are waking up, they're aware, they're frustrated, they want accountability. There's only one thing standing in the way of fascism, and that's the Democratic Party, if it gets its act together and reforms. So I'll leave you with that. We're going to be doing an interview with Representative Tulsi Gabbard at around 3:20 p.m. Eastern outside on this beautiful day in D.C. In front of the Capitol. I'm Nomiki. Thank you for joining us. Always appreciated.